I was gonna start out by greeting you guys in Sumerian and then I forgot. We don't really know exactly how ancient Sumerian was pronounced, obviously, because we don't have any recordings. It is a very dead language. The Sumerians were probably one of the earliest human civilizations. In Mesopotamia, like 6,000 years ago, I think it was actually more like 7,000 now, Sumer was probably founded, not officially, but it started to become a civilization in like 5700 BCE. And this was just humans finally figuring out, oh, we can farm. A few thousand years before, people figuring out, oh, we don't have to just like wander around and hunt and gather. If we put these seeds in the ground, it just grows right here. Also, if we want to make alcohol, we need a more stable environment to brew it. So we should settle down and just grow our own food and make alcohol. Anyway, but hello, at least an informal greeting, is Silim. And if you want to make it formal, I would say Silima Hemenden, which would be to a group of people, not just one person. As it is the oldest story ever written, that's kind of the key word here, written. We obviously don't have a lot of the stories that they probably told before the invention of writing. There was no way to keep that record. That's why writing is so important, that history literally begins when writing does. And if you want more information on like how writing systems developed and the different kinds, I have a YouTube video about that. But for now, the Sumerians used this script called cuneiform that the Akkadians later also adopted. And it was basically pressed into clay tablets using a stylus. Cuneiform was made out of lines and triangles basically because the stylus was a certain shape, and so they would just tilt it and mark in like stamps different shapes for different signs, basically, because they had a semanto-phonetic writing system, kind of like Chinese is today. At first, they just had images, like characters, that stood for one thing, and I can show you an old Sumerian poem. It's not this particular one, but this is the actual Sumerian. This is like a direct translation of the cuneiform. Is the word Gigachad? No. Gilgamesh, we'll actually talk about his name meaning in the story as well. But this is what it looked like. So this is not translated like word by word. It's an interpretation. And we're reading the first tablet today. I actually have used 2 different translations to hopefully get a better grasp of what's going on in the story. They were yes, exactly. Give the Sumerians a break. They didn't even have wheelbarrows. Lord, illustrious heaven. He's a powerful god. He is in this heavenly place. This is alien language, might as well be. And that is cuneiform. So if you saw like how everything's just kind of a really thin triangle, they used a stylus to press that into a clay block. And it was actually a pretty big deal to be able to write. Now, this is probably the most literate time in history, but in ancient Sumer, it took at least a couple of years to be trained as a scribe. The first cuneiform was mostly used for administrative documents, so like keeping track of money and salary of your workers. This was really invented to be a record-keeping system. But of course, people wanted to write down the stories that they liked. So here we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we don't actually have the entire story. It's been pieced together from different archaeological finds. The most complete version of it isn't even in Sumerian, it's in Akkadian. In the 19th century, we know that a lot of British archaeologists were wandering around the Middle East and Africa to do stuff and rob some pharaoh tombs and such. One of the finds in the 19th century by some of these British archaeologists was the library of Ashurbanipal. I'm probably saying that wrong, but again, we don't know how it was pronounced because everyone who ever spoke this language is dead. Seriously, even after the Sumerians, got conquered, their language was still a liturgical and literary language, kind of like Latin was. Latin is not so much a literary language anymore, but it was. Now it's mostly just a liturgical language, meaning it's like used in religious ceremonies, like you can have mass in Latin.
Sequentia Sancti Evangelii secundum Mattheum.
And it's pretty important to the Catholic Church. So Sumerian was like that for a bit before it fully died out in like 1000 BCE, I think. So Ashurbanipal was this Assyrian king who was king in like the 7th century BCE, but he was a big reader. He also conquered a lot of nations, but because he was so into books, he built a lot on the libraries of his predecessors, and whenever he, conquered a nation or someone that he had employed found literature, he basically collected as many literary works as he could and had them, copied and translated. And so when they found the ruins of his library, they found 24,000 clay tablets with most of the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's the most complete version we have because there really isn't a full copy in existence. The story is traveled. We've pieced it together from versions in other languages and other archaeological finds. So most of it's in Akkadian, or was in Akkadian. I have read the English versions, for the record. Sucks for Ashurbanipal's conquerees, but it was nice that he collected all of this literature, at least. The Epic of Gilgamesh, there are things in here. You'll notice some parallels to stories from the Bible, so it probably did influence the Bible, or maybe they influenced each other. I don't know. Again, I wasn't there. And Gilgamesh may or may not have been a real person. Some early Sumerian texts refer to him as a god. He's also on the Sumerian king list, and the Sumerian king list is just what it sounds like. It's a list of kings and when they ruled. But the thing about the Sumerian king list is that it's probably not super accurate because some of the guys on there, it says they reigned for over 1,000 years. And according to all known laws of biology, humans generally don't live that long. But he is on the king list. If he was a king, he probably ruled around 2700 BCE. It's possible that after his death, he was deified. People did that sometimes with figures they really liked after they died of natural causes or, just died a human death. They were well, now they must be a god. And the myth and the legend grows. We don't know if he was real, is the bottom line. History, like I said, gets a little hazy when we get to this point 6,000 years ago when the historical record and the archaeological record, the lines between them get blurred. People have been living in Mesopotamia a long time. There's a reason it was called the cradle of civilization or the Fertile Crescent. The thing is, in Mesopotamia, the Middle East, the areas where there were a lot of big early civilizations flourishing, like Egypt, was because the land around there is really good for growing crops. And so when humans first discovered agriculture, they were well, it works really well right here, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it, we're gonna settle right here. So when this story was first being told, writing probably wasn't even invented, which is why it's the oldest story ever written, and it's been written down by a lot of people, which is the only reason we have as much as we do of it. This is so long ago. It blows my mind. I don't know if it blows your mind how old this stuff is. The city of Uruk. Like I said, no one knows what ancient Sumerian sounded like, so I can pronounce it however I want. Uruk was a real place. It is in modern-day Iraq. Go back before the United States, before any European colonization, before the Mongol Empire stretched from Asia to the west edge of Russia, before the Roman Empire was even a kingdom, before the Greek city-states, before all of this. At this point in history, the Phoenicians haven't even made the writing system that eventually became our modern alphabet. The first emperors of China haven't even been born yet. This is before humans even could make fire hot enough to smelt iron. This is before the Iron Age. Stonehenge was made of wood, probably, at this point in history. It's Woodhenge. Stonehenge is still made of wood. Mesoamerican peoples are just now shifting from hunting and gathering to settling the first tiny little villages. Ancient Egypt, at the moment, ancient Egypt's been around for a bit because it's ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt is currently in turmoil because the upper and lower Egypt got separated again, and there's not a lot of centralized power. The nomarchs, who are basically governors, are busy fighting over power. It'll be a little bit before the 11th dynasty unifies Egypt again. Anyway, Egypt is in turmoil, but we're good. We're not in Egypt. We're in Uruk. So like I said, I will be using two different translations of the Sumerian text. I'll try to indicate which one. I'm using a translation by Andrew George and a translation by Maureen Gallery Kovac. Tablet 1. The Epic of Gilgamesh is generally divided into 11 or 12 tablets, depending on who you ask? We're just doing tablet 1 today, probably, because like I said, I have lots of notes. Do my thoughts bounce around a lot? They don't land. They do what they want. I'm just trying to keep up. Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an old story. It's old. I would say older than God, but it's not like older than gods. And I'm not reading it word for word, don't worry. It's a lot of repetition, actually, probably because translating from ancient Sumerian is not like a word for word thing. Like you guys saw, cuneiform is just a bunch of pictures, so it's just like king, tree, underground water, grape, land. We start with a bit of a teaser about Gilgamesh. He who has seen everything, from the Kovac translation, I will make known to the lands. So I am going to make known to you guys, I'm going to tell you about he who has seen everything. I don't think he's seen everything, as we'll find out, but he who saw the deep, the country's foundation. He experienced all things. He traveled everywhere and learnt of everything, the sum of wisdom. He saw what was secret, discovered what was hidden. It opens with a lot of praise for Gilgamesh. Also, I just want us to think about the fact that the oldest story ever written opens by talking about a bunch of stuff that happened a long time ago. If you get nothing else out of this, I just want you guys to have your minds blown by how freaking old this story is. It's insane. I love it. More about Gilgamesh. He went on a distant journey, pushing himself to exhaustion, but then was brought to peace. He carved on a stone stela all of his toils, and he built the wall of Uruk Haven. I hope you've heard of this story. It's the oldest story ever written. They repeatedly refer to it as Uruk Haven or Uruk the Sheepfold. This place of safety, haven, sheepfold. This was the world's very first city. Humans had barely figured out civilization at all. In a village of everybody's subsistence farming, like y'all kind of do your own thing, it helps to have a group. Urban living requires a lot more organization than just a village. You have to have a lot of planning done, and as this story says, it was planned by some pretty smart people. He also built the wall of the sacred Eanna temple, the holy sanctuary. So that's not just Uruk, the city, the Eanna temple or district, basically. Eanna in Sumerian means house of heaven. It was meant as a dwelling place of the gods. Like, they built houses for their gods. Religion in ancient Mesopotamia was a bit different than we see it today. Look at its wall, which gleams like copper, or possibly a strand of wool. The translations say different things. I'm gonna go with copper because that sounds more impressive. Inspect its inner wall, the likes of which no one can equal. We probably could today, but again, this was like 6,000 years ago, so building a wall at all was ridiculously difficult. I mean, not that it's not difficult, but it's more difficult when you've barely invented the wheel. Take hold of the threshold stone. It dates from ancient times. What is ancient times to this writer like 5,000 years ago? It dates from ancient times? When? This is already ancient times. This is like the most ancient of times. The stone is from ancient times? We just get ancienter and ancienter. But they were not cavemen.
We're not cavemen! We have technology!
They have technology. They lived in more than caves. So at least they're doing better than Adam and Eve were at this point. Eanna was not just a temple, like I said. It was an entire district. It was like walled off from the rest of Uruk to give the deities to whom it was dedicated privacy and protection. Building an entire district in a city is already a big job. Imagine trying to do that before they even invented wheelbarrows. Within the Eanna district was like the actual temple. This, for the times and probably even today, it was magnificent. It is gone now, but we do have some pieces. It was dedicated to the goddess Innana. You might also know her as Ishtar. That's her Assyrian name. It is her, the Queen of Heaven, as they call her, to whom the Eanna temple itself was dedicated, like the actual temple structure. It was thought to be her dwelling place when she was around, because every city kind of had like their patron deity, and she's a goddess. She can go wherever she wants. And there is a poem, another poem, about Innana and how she kind of got to where she is now. She was already a powerful goddess, And she was living her best life, honestly. She was minding her own business. And then she hears a voice calling her to the underworld. She went all Elsa and tried to ignore it, but eventually it got louder and louder until she could no longer ignore it.
I can hear you, but I won't. Into the end.
The underworld was ruled by her sister Ereshkigal, who is not the queen of heaven, but the queen of darkness. She's like the goddess of the dead. So she's like, fine, and starts heading down to the underworld, dressed to the nines, might I add. That's kind of important in the story. And she passed through the 7 gates of the underworld and had a respectable hero's journey. With every gate she passed through, she had to like give up one of her accessories or whatever until she got to the last one, and she's not wearing anything, and she is wounded and exhausted, and her sister's kind of a jerk about it. But ultimately, she came out stronger and wiser than ever and passed back through the 7 gates and made them give her her stuff back. It's kind of like when, actually, Constellation, yeah, it is kind of like that. That's actually that's a pretty good metaphor, and not what I was expecting. Anyway, it's difficult to define Inanna's actual divine domain. Like, she was the goddess of beauty, yes, love and beauty, like Aphrodite or Venus, and she was associated with that same planet. So she was associated with Venus, like the Sumerians. Each of the classical planets, which are like the astronomical things that can be seen with the naked eye. So like some of the planets, not all of the ones in the solar system, they didn't have telescopes. They barely had the wheel. But they were doing their best. They thought each of these classical planets like represented one of their deities, like might even be one of their deities. They didn't know it was up there. She was, yes, the goddess of love and beauty, but she was also very powerful as a goddess of sensuality and sex. We're gonna be mature about this, okay, everybody? Things like that were not quite thought of the same way in ancient Mesopotamia as they are today. That part of her domain, sex, also represented like the creative power of the universe. I mean, created humans, so quite a few religions actually, I think, liken it to divine power of life creation, and that's all we're gonna say about that. She also represented justice and political power, as well as being like a goddess of warfare. She would bring storms to just smash her enemies to pieces. She was a storm goddess too. Floods, don't mess with Inanna. The Sumerians also described her like as the bringer of law and justice. So she is unspeakably beautiful, intimidatingly ambitious, and unimaginably powerful. Her temple was really important. So she was Athena. I don't know. The goddess of, or the god of wisdom in this pantheon, I think, is Enlil. We'll talk about him a little bit, but I'm not sure. There's a good chance that Venus, Aphrodite, was influenced by Inanna or Ishtar. I'm not sure about Athena, but the Sumerians did have more influence than I think we give them credit for in most classical mythology and civilization. Like I said, religion in ancient Mesopotamia, it did not occupy the same place religion generally does today in modern society. The ancient Mesopotamians believed that by worshiping the gods, they were like maintaining the relationship between humans and gods, and thus trying to ensure the continued existence of humans, because the gods were in control of everything. Like, they were not just the personification of natural forces, they were considered to be people. They ran the whole world. So you gotta keep them happy, because they already tried to wipe out humanity once, actually. But more about Uruk's architecture. The poem now invites us to climb up on Uruk's city wall and examine its foundation and brickwork. They're like really confident in their construction abilities. And they're very proud of the fact that its bricks were fired in a real kiln. That was a big deal too, because like I said, humans don't even have fire hot enough to smelt iron yet, so they're not even at like Minecraft levels. This was at least around the same time. They also ask, did not the 7 sages themselves lay out Uruk's plans? The 7 sages, or the Apkallu, were 7 mythological wise men that were sent by the gods to teach mankind, because when the gods first created humans, the humans were really confused for a bit. They didn't really know what they were supposed to be doing. Can you blame them? So the gods sent the Apkallu, who came out of the ocean, to teach humanity how to, like, get food and stuff so that they could even get to the point where they could learn to build these great civilizations. And the Apkallu reportedly taught humans like everything: math, reading and writing, farming, building big cities, and even like how to make laws and govern themselves. This says they laid out the plans for Uruk themselves, so it's probably pretty well done, is what they're saying here. Then they give you like the dimensions of the city of Uruk. The poem's introduction ends by inviting us to find the tablet box, which is said to be made of cedar in the George translation and copper in the Kovac translation. I guess they really like copper. I don't know which one it is though. It's to open its bronze clasp and take out and read from a tablet of lapis lazuli about all that Gilgamesh went through. My tablet is not made of lapis lazuli, like it's just a Kindle, but imagine, okay? We're using our imagination. He is also the most powerful of all the kings and leaders. He is courageous in battle and trusted by his comrades, a mighty bank protecting his warriors, a raging flood wave who destroys even walls of stone. Quote, Gilgamesh is strong to perfection. Basically the whole, like, first bit of the tablet is just going off about how awesome Gilgamesh is. With his strength, he also reportedly opened passes in the mountains. He dug wells also in the mountains, pretty important for a civilization. He crossed the ocean and explored the whole world seeking life far away beyond the horizon. Utnapishtim lives like beyond the place that the sun sets because, again, I don't think they had like satellite mapping. So we're just gonna take their word for that. Gilgamesh the It's like in The Office when he drives into the lake.
It said go to the right.
It can't mean that. There's a lake there.
I think it knows where it is going.
This is the
The
lake.
machine
This
knows.
is the lake.
Stop yelling at me.
No, it's
Stop
up there.
yelling.
There's no road here.
Who can compare with him in kingliness? Who can say like Gilgamesh, I am king? Whose name from the day of his birth was called Gilgamesh? Which, like, that last one's not exactly a brag, but in Sumerian, the name Gilgamesh means the man, the kinsman, is a hero. He's not just a demigod, by the way, like I said. He is 2/3 god and 1/3 man. I know it's kind of some weird math. He does just have two parents. Gilgamesh is reportedly the offspring of Lugalbanda, whose name itself in Sumerian means young or fierce king, and according to the Sumerian kings list, he is also on there. Lugalbanda ruled Uruk for 1,200 years, and he's also featured in a lot of other ancient Mesopotamian stories. Like, he had his own adventures before Gilgamesh did. What we have left of those, I looked at a couple. Lugalbanda was completing divine quests of his own and becoming a god and all that. His mother, quote, the august cow Rimat Ninsun, is also a goddess, the lady of wild cows. And I don't think this is an insult or anything. Like, cows were probably very valuable livestock to the Sumerians. Like we talked about with Johnny Lingo. She's not even just an 8-cow woman, she is all the cows. And actually there are a few Sumerian kings who claim to be the offspring of Ninsun and Lugalbanda. So I imagine it probably helped people have faith in you as a ruler if you, like, claim to be the child of some gods. But it's also not enough to have full-on deities for parents. Gilgamesh his body apparently was literally designed by another goddess. He is described as beautiful, handsomest of men, and perfect, with probably a bunch of other stuff because there's a bunch of like breaks in the translations there. So all of the authors that wrote this were just super down bad for Gilgamesh, probably. How is Gilgamesh? He is doing just fine. For now. Gilgamesh is a powerful dude, is my point. And the George translation actually gives us some of his measurements, like of his physical body. I am a little skeptical about their accuracy though, because according to the George translation, a triple cubit was his foot, half a rod his leg, 6 cubits was his stride. If you don't know what a cubit is, if you've read the Bible, it does appear. A rod, not sure, that wasn't actually a Mesopotamian unit of measurement, but. So a cubit, which in Hebrew was called amma, which means like the mother of the arm, or basically the forearm. In English, it comes from the Latin word cubitus, which means elbow, but it was an ancient unit of measurement. If you, like I said, if you've read the Bible, the dimensions of Noah's Ark, they give it in cubits. So the cubit was like the length of your elbow to the tip of your middle finger or the center of your palm or the tip of your pinky. Again, it varies. They didn't have the internet, so who knows how to do anything. But it was basically the length from your elbow to your hand, and that was how they measured stuff. These days, it's usually estimated around 18 inches, but obviously if you're measuring stuff with one of your body parts, it's going to vary by person to person. I'm gonna see how long mine is. My cubit is 16 and a half inches or 42 centimeters for my metric system friends. So less than the usual estimation, but good thing I have measuring tape so I don't have to rely on the length of my arm. Like I said, they're doing their best. Obviously, we don't know exactly how long it was because everybody is dead. Like I said, it's usually about 18 inches or 46 centimeters. I wrote that down, 46 centimeters. A rod is not as ancient. It really became popularized in England in like the 14th, 15th century. The rod is not a unit of measurement from ancient Mesopotamia, but I'm just gonna take their word for it because at this point I was like, this is a lot of numbers and we've established I'm not good at numbers. 21, so yeah, yours would be probably one of the longest average cubits used in the ancient world. I saw that on the internet. Anyway, so the measurements were for Gilgamesh. A triple cubit was his foot, half a rod his leg, 6 cubits was his stride, so like the length of his step. Just by our estimates, that makes Gilgamesh's foot 4.5 feet long, or about 1.37 meters. Bigfoot's not Cain, Bigfoot's Gilgamesh. His leg would be like 8 feet and 3 inches, or about 2.5 meters, and his stride would be 9 feet or 2 3/4 of a meter. So either I have the math wrong, the measurements wrong, or Uruk did not design him very human-like. Or a fourth option, it's gotten lost in translation because it's been like 6,000 years. Like I said, I'm not good at numbers. Both manuscripts refer to him as most handsome and it's human perfection, so I guess just like, I'm gonna just try not to think about the numbers. There are 2 types of countries, those that use them. Okay, but the metric system makes math way easier. Clearly, this says he's big. He's a big dude. He would be anyway, because apparently he's like the strongest guy around ever, for now. Gilgamesh is heroically strong and clever, and irresistibly handsome, and, quote, there is no rival who can raise his weapon against him. He has built the walls of this glorious city of Uruk and its sacred temple sanctuary. The point is, Gilgamesh is insanely strong and drop-dead gorgeous, more god than man, genetically. What more could people want from their king? I'm gonna tell you, he was also a massive tyrant. Quote, like a wild bull, he makes himself mighty, head raised over others. He needs to get some humility and also stop doing the prima nocta thing. Like I said, this is the part about the women. He takes any woman he wants, even if she's already married to someone else. His glorious temples and walls and all these structures were also built with slave labor. Forced labor. Maybe they were paid, but they did not have a choice. He should be the shepherd of Uruk, the sheepfold, keeping it safe and the people happy. He is the ruler. This is his responsibility. What good is it to be safe from outside threats when your king is a huge tyrant? He's going all prima nocta with any girl that is getting married. Do we know what prima nocta is? I will give a brief overview. If you've seen The Office, I guess, you might know.
I am instituting prima nocta.
But the point is, prima nocta is the idea that when a woman gets married, the lord of her land or whoever's in charge gets to deflower her on her wedding night.
I'm sorry. I had a very different understanding as to what prima nocta meant.
He was doing that. Yeah. Anyway, he's also so strict with his soldiers that they're just super stressed out, way more than they need to be to do their jobs. That seems like a good way to... Oh, he is! His people are not happy. He has incredible power. But his people are not having a good time. So... what are they gonna do? Because he is the kingliest dude and no one can raise a weapon against him. They pray to the gods for help. They pray to Anu, the Sky Father, or just An, if you're his Sumerian name. But he's the king of the gods. They pray to be delivered from him, and he hears. Now, the usual version of the Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't have this little bonus scene of Anu reacting to their prayers, but I got this from the George translation. This scene here was found on a practice tablet that was used by a scribe in training to copy part of an older version of the story. They call Aruru, Anu hears these prayers, and they call Aruru the mother goddess and like the earth goddess, and she's the one who made humans, and they're like, hey, your humans are upset because the one you personally designed sucks. Go make someone equal to the one you personally designed so he can be done away with, or at least distracted from being a jerk to his people. I heard he would go into... He probably didn't need to go into Twitch chats. He'd just make people show him their feet anyway. Yeah, so Anu is like, let's make Aruru deal with this. She designed him. It is only fair that she should be the one to figure out how to contain him. So Aruru is like, yeah, I guess that's fair. She washed her hands, took a pinch of clay, and threw it into the wilderness. I guess when you're a goddess, it's really not that hard to just make people. I don't know where she got the clay. I don't know if she has like an arts and crafts closet or something, just full of all of the mystical creatures that didn't end up on Earth, but that she made at one point. I don't know. She took a pinch of clay and threw it into the wilderness, and I'm glad she washed her hands at least. Like, it's important to be sanitary when creating humans. And then throwing them into the dirt. Must have been some special clay, clearly. She makes Gilgamesh's, I am definitely going to say this wrong, Zikrt. Basically, the word means his counterpart, his equal, someone to balance him out. Enkidu is his name, the hero, offspring of silence, knit strong by Ninurta. So I guess someone else had a hand in his creation. I thought she just chucked the clay in the wilderness, but who am I to question the Mesopotamian gods? Which I guess I've been kind of doing that this whole time, so... Whatever, at least it's not Zeus. Enkidu is covered in hair, and his hair is described in the translations as both matted and shaggy in the George and Kovacs translations respectively, but they do agree that he had long hair on his head, quote, like a woman. I don't know if they've ever seen a woman with a pixie cut, but... And the George translation compares his hair to thick growing barley. It also compares Gilgamesh's hair to thick growing barley. I don't think they had a lot of other things to compare it to, but the Kovacs translation compares it to the hair of Ashnan, who is the goddess of barley, but the thing is, it's probably both, because Ashnan, this barley goddess, was also known as Ezina, which was also a Sumerian word for just grain, and Ashnan in Akkadian means the same thing, so probably just translation choice, and that was the only time that I found a difference in the translation that I could really explain. They keep comparing the hair to the barley, and it just makes me think of that scene in Hannah Montana where Jason and Miley, like, at different times are both trying to butter up their dad. I don't remember why, but they keep comparing his hair to a field of wheat. It's so lush. I think about that all the time. The soundbite is still in my head. Anyway, so he's covered in hair, is the point. Ashnan, if we're gonna say Ashnan, she and her sister Lahar is like a livestock goddess. They were created to provide food for the gods, but they couldn't produce enough, even as goddesses. So the gods were like, you guys go to the human world then and teach them how to farm, because I think we just need more numbers on this. They're hungry. Godly appetites, I guess. Also, the humans probably deserved an upgrade at this point, because before Ashnan and Lahar showed up, humans were just like eating grass like sheep, apparently, and just walking around naked. The gods were like, well, let's put these to good use, making food for us. The sisters end up in the human world, and then they proceed to get completely trashed on sweet wine and sweet beer, both like specifically, and then they start fighting over who's more important to mankind. And that was the poem that I was talking about earlier. The debate between sheep and grain was actually quite popular entertainment in Sumerian times. Like, it's a poem, but it's also a story, and people would take on the roles of Ashnan and Lahar and, like, stage this whole debate about it. As a god, I'd choose to be myself. We love that. Eating grass and walking around. Well, the thing is, grass doesn't have a lot of nutritional value. Humans don't really have the digestive system to get a lot of nutrients out of things like grass. Cows have 4 stomachs. and a lot of time on their hands. I think if I had to eat grass and still eat as much as a human needs, I would simply die, because you have to eat a lot of grass, and grass doesn't taste very good. Anyway, we found a lot of copies of the debate between sheep and grain, so it was reportedly very popular entertainment. So they fight over who's more important to mankind, grain or sheep. They won't stop fighting, so eventually Enki and Enlil are like, guys, knock it off. And Enlil resolves, Enki is the god of wisdom. Why did I think it was Enlil? Who's Enlil? I forgot. I don't know. Enki is the god of wisdom. I was wrong before. Anyway, he declared Ashnan the winner because grain can live without sheep, but sheep cannot live without grain, or grass and plants, I guess. Sheep need to eat. Grain just needs the sun to eat. Sheep cannot photosynthesize. Actually, this story might have been based in real life conflict between sheep herders, shepherd, that's the word. Whatever, they do the sheep thing. They lead them around and the sheep need to eat the grass. And grain farmers fighting over land because grain needs lots of land to grow, but also sheep need land to graze, and all of the stuff that they had to keep the grain growing, like the irrigation and such, was kind of a hazard for sheep who just walk and then they will fall into whatever is in their path, so that causes problems for the shepherds. So there was probably some tension between sheep farmers and grain farmers, and maybe that's where this story came from, but who knows, because it was 5,000 years ago. Anyway, Enkidu. Enkidu is a wild man. Kind of like Tarzan, except there are no apes. There's just gazelles and other beasts that they don't really name. He's basically an animal, even though he's physically human. Much like the early humans in the debate between sheep and grain, he eats grass with the gazelles, and he hangs out with the animals in the wilderness, and it seems like he's actually pretty okay with that. I don't think he's ever known anything else. He came out of the mountains and was like, that has legs? I have legs. Okay. And just went all Jungle Book, I guess, but there's no jungle. I don't think there was a jungle. Anyway, he hangs out in the wilderness with the gazelles all the time until the day a hunter, he's never actually named, just a hunter that goes out and gets animals for food, presumably. Why don't we say assumably? And presumably is the word, but why don't we have that for assume? He comes face to face with this hunter. Face to face, as the Kovac translation says. 3 days in a row. And it is immediately apparent to this hunter that Enkidu is crazy strong. He has to be. He's Gilgamesh's counterpart. And Gilgamesh is crazy strong. But not only that, Enkidu has been breaking his traps and freeing the animals in them, and when he digs pits, Enkidu just fills them in again. It's probably really useful to the animals that he hangs out with that someone has opposable thumbs. He has been ruining this hunter's chances of hunting. But what's he gonna do? He knows he can't beat Enkidu in a fight. They don't have guns yet. It's very clear that Enkidu is stronger than him. It's like the SpongeBob episode where he's like, he's gonna kick my butt!
Hi, I'm SpongeBob.
Hi, SpongeBob. I'm gonna kick your butt.
Although Enkidu doesn't actually, threaten him or anything. It doesn't say he did. If he did, he hasn't really talked yet. My point is, he's messing up stuff for this hunter, and the hunter is actually pretty depressed about it. He's super frustrated. It's his whole reason for living. Life was simpler back then, I guess. So he goes to his dad and complains. And look, I don't think Enkidu is doing anything wrong here. He doesn't know what's going on. He's like, hey, this hurt my animal friend. I'm gonna help them. I think Enkidu has benevolent intentions. But it's causing problems for the hunter. So he complains to his dad that this dude who hangs out with the animals, keeps destroying his traps, but he can't do anything about it because he's terrified of this guy, because he's clearly insanely strong. His father tells him that in Uruk, there is a man called Gilgamesh whose strength cannot be matched by any other mortal. We'll see about that, considering Enkidu was literally made to stand against Gilgamesh. So the dad is like, go to Uruk and talk to Gilgamesh. And I don't know how the dad knows all this. He's like, Gilgamesh will give you Shamhat, who is a, quote, harlot, and Shamhat will be able to tame Enkidu not through sheer muscular strength, but through seduction. The father says, bring her to the watering hole, and when Enkidu shows up to drink some water, have her take her clothes off. That'll get his attention. Like I said, I don't know how he knows all this. Clearly they don't live in Uruk, but the hunter is like, yeah, okay, I got nothing better to do, so he takes his father's advice and sets off for Uruk, and Gilgamesh says literally the exact same thing that this guy's father did. Clearly, he's psychic. It might also just be a translation thing because you guys saw the grammar of cuneiform. The hunter goes to Gilgamesh and he's like, hey, there's this guy who came from the mountains and is, quote, the mightiest in the land, and he keeps messing up my traps so I can't catch anything, but I don't dare confront him because he could definitely kick my butt with his crazy wild man strength. It happens just as his father said. Gilgamesh tells him to take, quote, the harlot, Shamhat, out into the wilderness and do the exact same thing that his father said, word for word. But seeing the grammar of cuneiform, I think it's just the normal repetition of, like, folk tales. Anyway, Shamhat's like, yeah, okay, and they set off to find Enkidu. A word on her title. The word harlot is not really one I agree with in the translations. I don't know if we have a better one in English because, like I said, sex was viewed differently in ancient Mesopotamia than it is today, and we're all going to be mature about it. I don't really have a good alternative. But I just want to explain a little bit more about Shamhat's role because I feel like, especially in traditional stories, women who are looked at as, like, prostitutes are just kind of written off as objects. And while Shamhat is a sex worker of a type, that does not accurately depict what her role probably was, at least in my theory. Differently how? First of all, a great deal of at least modern Western attitudes about sex have been heavily informed by Christianity, especially in the United States. In Mesopotamia, this is several thousand years before Christianity even existed, first of all. Sex was actually sometimes part of religious rituals. Maybe. There are theories about this. Shamhat is described as a sacred prostitute, or a temple prostitute. She's not a prostitute in the sense that a lot of us might think. Like, it's not lovely ladies from Les Mis. I am certainly not saying that sex workers of any type don't deserve respect and safety. I just want to emphasize that this is not a prostitute in the sense that a lot of modern people might think. Like, some religious rituals in ancient Mesopotamia may actually have involved sex. The best known is their hieroskamos, which is Greek for holy marriage. This is believed to have been a ceremony in which the king or one of the high priests would themselves represent deities, Innana and her consort Dumuzi. They would reenact the marriage of Innana and her consort, and as part of that, there may have been a consummation aspect. It was a religious thing. It was part of their belief that they were maintaining this relationship with the gods. It was an act of worship, because in the story that they're reenacting, Innana and Dumuzi have been apart for a long time, and in the story, when they reunite, their divine joy reawakens the whole land and, like, improves the fertility of their crops. So this was actually an act of worship. This was part of their religion. And by reenacting it, it was hoped that the same awakening would happen to their harvest then. The point is, in ancient Mesopotamia, sex was not viewed the same as it is today. Shamhat was probably not what we would picture a prostitute as. Again, I don't think that sex workers should be shamed. This is not to say prostitution is shameful and bad and Shamhat is different. She probably was a sex worker of a sort, just religiously. I want to emphasize that she is not an object of a story from a patriarchal society used for her body. She's actually pretty powerful. Her role in religious rites, like the hieroskamos, was believed to ensure the favor of the gods. She's a very respectable and admirable figure in the story, and in fact, one sense of her name means the Magnificent One. And again, sex workers, regardless of their role in whatever society they're in, of course deserve respect and decency. It's historical context. My point is, it's not the same as we might think of a prostitute today. However, people who do sex work still deserve respect. Anyway, so in other senses, in addition to the Magnificent One, Shamahu, the word that it comes from, it can mean like to grow or to flourish or even to attain extraordinary beauty. Her name can also be translated as the Luscious One, because without a doubt, Shamhat is incredibly hot. It's kind of emphasizing her character. She is very good looking. Back to the story, off of my lecture about the world's oldest profession. So despite the fact that Shamhat and the hunter make direct way, it takes them 3 days to find the place where the hunter first saw Enkidu, and then they have to wait another 2 days at the watering hole for him to show up with his animal friends. Finally, quote, Enkidu, offspring of the mountains, who eats grasses with the gazelles, for now, came to drink at the watering hole with the other animals. Quote, his heart delighting with the beasts in the water. The hunter's like, oh, that's him! Shamhat, take off your clothes, quick! Don't be weirded out about how he smells, or in the Kovac translation, his energy. Don't be shy. She is not shy. She is ready for this. The hunter's like, lay your robe out like a bed and, quote, do for the man the work of a woman, which I also think is kind of a reduction of women's role, even in ancient Sumerian society. In ancient Sumer, they didn't have total gender equality, but women could own land and run a business and work as doctors or priestesses or judges. The Assyrians didn't really give women rights, but in ancient Sumer, women could be relatively independent. But do for him the work of a woman and he'll forget his life with the animals. Shamhat sticks to the plan and strips down, and Enkidu is immediately into it. She is explicitly not weird about his smell or his energy, whatever it is. Long story short, it's actually quite short in the text as well. They copulate for 6 days and 7 nights until, quote, with her delights he was fully sated. And once they're done, he sits up and looks at the animals that he's been running around with his whole life, and they no longer seem to recognize him. They run away. And he gets up and tries to follow them, but he can no longer run like he could before. He has been tamed, so to speak. With this act, Shamhat has civilized him, sort of, in a sense. He has lost the primitive purity of the wilderness, but in return, he has gained, quote, reason and wide understanding. Apparently this also taught him to speak. And now we see Shamhat take kind of a maternal role. Almost. It's not a weird Oedipal thing. It's another aspect of the divine femininity exemplified by Innana, the goddess she serves. And Enkidu has never lived among humans, of course, so he has a lot to learn. So, like a child to his mother, he sits at her feet and she teaches him. She says, quote, you are handsome, Enkidu. You are just like a god. And indeed, we've seen him, I didn't really read that part, but earlier in the text, he was compared to Samak Sumukan, who was like a god of the wilderness in the Kovac translation. And she's like, why with the beasts do you wander the wild? Come, let me bring you into Uruk haven, to the holy temple, the residence of Anu and Ishtar, where Gilgamesh is perfect in strength, but who struts his power over the people like a wild bull. And in his new humanity and self-awareness, Enkidu, quote, knew by instinct he should seek a friend. And he likes Shamhat. She seems pretty nice. And he likes what she's saying. And he replies, come, Shamhat, take me away with you to the place of Gilgamesh. I will challenge him. I will vaunt myself in Uruk, saying, I am the mightiest. To vaunt means like to brag. Lead me in, and I will change the order of things. He whose strength is mightiest is the one born in the wilderness. I don't know where the hunter went, by the way. He just, isn't mentioned again. I don't know, maybe he just left to, give him some privacy, or maybe he was like, all right, my job's done. Humanize him. I'm gonna come back with my traps later. Did he call her? Her job is, this is not a romantic thing so much as it is, even though they are intimate, I don't think it's so much of a romantic thing as it is not a conquering, but a changing of this man who lives with the animals and like the animals into one who is fit for civilization. She shows the aspect of Innana that is sensual and has that attractive power, and now she is showing the more maternal side of that femininity, the maternal side of that femininity, taking on a role as his teacher and guiding him into his new humanity. Shamhat can emphasize both of these. She is both attractive and sultry in a carnal manner, but she is also a teacher and a caregiver and a guide. And so there's no separation here. These aspects of femininity, especially personified by a priestess of Innana, are just part of their idea of feminine aspects to celebrate. The point is here that having sex and being, in a sense, a sex worker does not make Shamhat any less worthy of doing the work of her goddess, of teaching Enkidu about civilization so that he can come help deal with Gilgamesh. It's just interesting to me. So they're making their way to Uruk, Shamhat and Enkidu. And Shamhat on the way is explaining every day in Uruk is a festival, and the lyre and drum play continually. There's always a party and music playing, and there are pretty girls, yes, just like me. It's just delightful. Enkidu, you have no idea what you've been missing while you were, outside civilization, and of course you have to meet Gilgamesh, the king. I don't know if Shamhat knows this, but he is Gilgamesh's counterpart. He is meant to balance him out. He's really handsome and strong, stronger than you, even if he's sleep deprived, I bet. You've got to be civilized like him now. I love Gilgamesh. He has wisdom from the gods themselves. Seriously, before you even came from that mountain to the watering hole, Gilgamesh was having visions about you in dreams. Cut to Gilgamesh having visions and dreams about Enkidu. Not really Enkidu, but they're actually some pretty weird dreams. This was another thing I appreciated about the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that the dream visions are just as weird as like real dreams. And I get dream visions. Sometimes you need them to make a point in a story. I'm not complaining about that, but I do love that Gilgamesh's dream visions are just bonkers. But lucky for him, like, his mom is a literal goddess and can just interpret them. So he goes to his mom and he's like, I had this dream where a rock fell out of the sky and landed in front of me, and I tried to pick it up, but it was too heavy for me, so I tried to roll it, but I still couldn't move it, which is weird for Gilgamesh because he's ridiculously strong. And then the whole land of Uruk was gathering around it, and they were kissing it like it was their newborn child. I loved it too. I embraced it like a wife, and then I could pick it up and I set it down at your feet, Mom, and you made it my equal. Or, in the Kovacs translation, you made it compete with me. Dream logic. I don't know. And his mother, Rimat Nimsun, the lady of the wild cows, of course she knows everything, and so she tells him what it means. A mighty man, equal in might to you, and a comrade, will come to you and be your friend and often save you when you need help. He will be as strong as that rock from the sky, and you will love him and embrace him like a wife. Gilgamesh is like, all right, thanks. Gilgamesh has another dream, and it's pretty much the same thing as before, but this time, instead of a rock out of the sky, it's just a random axe, like to cut down trees, lying in the town square, no word on whether it's wooden or stone. Again, with a crowd gathered around it, and this he also loves and embraces as a wife, and puts it at his mother's feet, and she makes it equal to him, or makes it compete with him, whichever translation. And his mother tells him pretty much the same thing as before, except this time it's an axe instead of a rock. A man, equal in strength to you, a comrade will come to you, and you will love him as much as you would a wife, and he will save you. The axe and the rock falling out of the sky both represent Enkidu. Gilgamesh he's like, yeah, all right, I love new friends. This is great. By the command of Enlil, the great counselor. And Shamhat knows about all this. She recounts this to Enkidu, and again, they have sex. Maybe it's to like help him retain the stories, or maybe they're just two attractive people doing what comes naturally. And that's the end of the first tablet. Hatchet, you could say Hatchet is a love story, but loving oneself enough to struggle to survive. So that is the first tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Like I said, we're just reading the first tablet today because I have a lot of things to talk about. But I am planning to continue this, unless you guys really, really hate it. We'll continue with the next tablet another time.